Hello friends, my name is Bhakti Upadhyay. I'm working with LT College of Nursing as a visiting faculty for sociology. Today we are going to learn about social anthropology, and in this we are starting with unit number 4, that is social, economic and political organization. In this particular unit we are going to learn about law and social control, authority and leadership, types of political organization band, tribes and state, kinship and chiefdom, primitive law and justice, and type of punishment. To start with, we will first see what is the introduction. All the societies place restraint upon the behavior of their member. In some cases, traditional or customary behavior are observed simply because individuals are unaware that alternatives exist. No agreement exists that this restraint and customs are said to be viewed as a part of law. On the other hand, most anthropologists and students of comparative law are agreed that law is much more the constitution and statutes administered by special enforcement officers or by courts. Although law has the concern of a number of earlier anthropologists, the subject has been inadequately treated and few exemptions. Only recently has law become a primary concern of some modern anthropologists. Consequently, we will limit our discussion to some generally agreed upon aspect of law. So, let us see what are the learning objective of this particular paper. This unit is aimed at familiarizing you with the ways in which behavior is organized. We have emphasized the fact that living in the social group is an attribute of being human. So that you would have some idea about law and order is not simply the absence or preventing of writing of protection of individuals from assault, the protection of property from destruction or from seizure by others, or the systematic settlement of disputes between the individuals or groups in a society. It is the behavior of individual according to the expectation of fellow members of the society. After studying this unit, you would be able to explain how the laws and its functioning rarely can be understood without the observation of behavior when trouble appears, and to analyze the violations are classified in a different ways in a various societies, and to describe what may be regarded as a crime in one society may be viewed as a personal matter in another, and at last to know even murder may be regarded as a crime against society but as an injury to family or a kin group. So first, dear learners, we will start with the meaning of law and social control. In primitive society, the growth of law is a slow and spontaneous process of usage and customs being given the sanction of time and force. There is no legislation in the sense we know it in our civilized society, although some rare examples have been cited from America and the Philippines, where solitary cases of sudden legal reforms as a result of the chiefs will have been reported by Redfield. Whenever the laws come into existence, it is not a selected group of individuals like a legislator who are responsible for it, but the society as a whole. Nature of primitive law. It had been asserted for a long that primitive society, being characterized by unbridled violence, anarchy and chaos, primitive laws are preponderantly criminal law. Louis showed the errors of assumption involved. He pointed out that since interpersonal relations are governed by fixed status, inheritance of property by well-defined custom, and since the contractual basis of interrelationship is unknown, the scope for civil law in the primitive jurisprudence was limited. Primitive law, he maintains, is different from our own in three different ways. It is largely conceived of in terms of kinship bond and not the territorial tie. It is more or less identical with the ethical norms and public opinion, and does not distinguish between crimes and torts, that is between the public and the private wrongs as is done in modern juridic system. Or now, authority and leadership. You must have heard about the authority and leadership in primitive society. In primitive society, public opinion is a very powerful influence in the life of its small individual members. The number of people constituting a primitive society being generally small. The total picture we have is that of well-integrated homogeneous group of people where each is known to everyone else, and where due to limited members or due to limited numbers and integration there is no scope for segment of various public opinions, as in the case in modern society. The public opinion in a primitive society is one exclusive, strong and compelling. It is based not on expediency and the self-interest of a group within the society, but on certain common sentiment pertinent to some conception of what is good and right. In other words, public opinion in primitive society originates from the moral, ethical notion of the people concerned and nearly coincide with the same. There is no escape from it and no protection against it. Everybody has its representative is a policeman, and the arm of law is the longest in such societies, though perhaps not so comprehensive and ruthless as in our own. In a primitive society, the individual's dependence upon the group is absolute, and in this group there is no multiplicity of ethical norms and standards. The individual is very sensitive to the group comment, which is always uniform. In primitive society, we find different types of authority and leadership. It means head office of Chota Nagpur, the contact between the HO and the administrative officers who administer the new laws is not direct but through certain officials chosen from amongst the villagers. Menkis and Mundas are the main types of intermediary who work among their own people but for the government. These tribal officers have been instrumental in bringing about the decline of the local panchayat. However, attempts have been made to preserve the traditional machinery of administering laws and settling disputes. In this tribal society, traditional machinery as well as the government tried to settle the disputes in the village assembly, and the result of such proceeding recorded. Here we see another example of one more tribal society found in Andaman. The find a number of nuclear families linked not necessarily by kinship but by common and habitual association. Like the Keriria Horde, the Andaman village is very small, averaging some 40 to 45 individuals of all age group. Leadership among the Andamanis rests men who are respected for their skills in hunting and warfare and who are kind, generous and even tempered. Such men attract followers among the young who seek the goodwill of the leaders by giving them gifts, helping them in their work and accompanying them on hunting or the war expedition. On the other hand, men who are violent, stringy and bad-tempered are feared and avoided by their followers. Dear learners, now we are going to learn about the types of political organization band. In most society, a substantial part of the law functions through the political system and its institution, and it is difficult completely to separate law and political organization. Political organization has indeed been defined as the organized way of applying force to the maintenance of ordered relation between the categories or groups of people. This implies power and authority to utilize it. Most political organizations do more than deal with conflicting involving the social order. They also provide means for making group decisions and administering programs. Nevertheless, it is the close relation between political system and the law which permit us to combine our brief treatment of the law with the discussion of political organization. To understand this, we must take a broad view of political functions and related institutions. Though the local group forms a starting point for the study of political organization, it is not itself necessarily a political unit. Political groups, even when they are identical in membership with a local group, are more explicit organized into a functioning whole. This organization is accomplished through a leader or a set of leaders who command the respect and elegance of the members of the group. These leaders, number 1, maintain peace within the political group. Number 2, organize and direct community enterprises. And number 3, conduct group activities such as warfare directed against neighboring units of the same order. Although here we emphasize the territorial group, it should be observed that similar type of leaders exist within large group with analogues but more restricted function. The introduction of political organization into local group, it is evident, gives rise to a unity between its members that stand over and above that imposed by kinship. Many political units, as we shall see in the following sections, are in the essence voluntary alliance of families and clans who not only acknowledge the same political leaders but also through the medium of this leadership habitually work together in economic enterprises, social and ceremonial affairs, and the conduct of offensive and defensive warfare. Indeed, it is extremely likely that true political organization begins only with the development of cooperation between distinctive unrelated kinship groups. In a particular society, as long as kinship units are relatively self-sufficient economically and require no aid in defending themselves against hostile aliens, political organization has little opportunity to develop. As a guide to our study of political organization, we may set up the following provisional categories. The number 1 category, the societies in which there is no true political organization, that is, in which the local group has no continuous or well-defined system of leaders over and above those who head the individual families that make it up. Societies of this sort tend also to be small and widely dispersed, to have economies that yield only a bare substance, and to lack any form of organized welfare. Political function are present but not political organization. Number 2, societies. Societies organized politically as bonds, tribes or confederacies in which the population tends to be somewhat more concentrated. The economy yields a richer substances but no exchangeable surplus, and warfare through frequent and often of great importance is usually a matter of ceaseless riding between neighboring political units. Where wars are more decisive, they result only in the extermination or explosion of enemy units, not in their conquest and economic exploitation. Number 3, societies organized as a conquest is established by dint of offensive wars in which conquered people are not usually destroyed but are held as a tributaries or incorporated as inferior classes into the conquest state. Population are large and highly concentrated. The economic producers an exchangeable surplus, and the ruling power in most instances tend to be centered in a small hereditary elite. Religious and the political concept by which a ruler is seen as an incarnation, manifestation, mediator or agent of the sacred or holy. It means kinship is the holistic concept. Basic to an understanding of caste of sacred kinship is recognized that the exercise of power of one person over the other person or over a community in early time was general and not divided. Power could be exercised by only one person, one who simultaneously had the necessary physical and spiritual strength and influence over both people and objects. Because he was ruler over a community, the king's power extended to everything pertaining to the life of the community. Only gradually did a division of these powers develop? There are several aspects of ancient Egypt that we should explore outright. The first sense of divine kingship. Divine kingship is a concept that views a ruler as an incarnation, manifestation, mediator, or agent of the sacred world. Divine kingship can be viewed as a supernatural outgrowth of societal change in the complex societies in context of chiefdom and state dynamics. It is a political and religious form of organization that repeatedly developed in cultures all over the world. The divine kinship typically emerge as a result of the development hierarchically structure. Chiefs who declare their leadership through kin descent become focused on control of land and resources. As a result, they seek to gain political advantage. Their position is desert hierarchy enabled them to call upon ancestors for assistance. Clan rank typically can be associated of spiritual powers. This fusion of political and social world with the religious world is assumed to be ordered and logical. As a result, it is relative kinship with ability to communicate with the spiritual and ancestral world. Hierarchically structure would then evolve logically from the chiefdom into a divine kinship as population growth increased and the need for the greater political authority and control developed. The issue becomes one of how much control and now how does it reach. Various types of sacred kinship have prevailed in ancient cultures. There are three basic characteristics of sacred kings. There are the receptacle of supernatural or divine power. Second characteristic, they descend from the divine or semi-divine rulers. And number 3 is they are agent or the mediator of the sacred. All the types of sacred kingship share a number of basic functions that the king must fulfill to varying the degree depending on the society and culture. The king's role as a barrier of magical power and his influence over the weather, fertility and health clear. In a sense, the king will regarded as more or less the good shepherd who feeds and cares for his folk. Protecting the community from enemies is another crucial function of many sacred kings who, as warlords, attempt to use their divine knowledge and power to make strategic decisions and successfully carry out the proper course of action. This is particularly clear in the Mayan world where supernatural spirit companies such as jaguars an important role as source of power and influence. Now, dear learners, we are going to learn about the chiefdoms. The term chiefdom is related with the political leader. Chiefs are considered as a socio-political leader. A chief is an ascribed leader. He occupies a hereditary position. Chiefship is the prerogative of certain family. When the old chief dies, his son or sometimes a brother or a nephew will succeed him. For example, in the movie named Virasat, the term chiefdom has rarely been used. There is a little difference in the term chief and chiefdom. The term chief is indicative for rather unspecified social status, while chiefdom is connected with a specific type of political structure. The chiefdom is a part of a system of political structure based on ties of administration. The simplest system consists of local community only characterized by one administrative level. For example, the village headman. The next system of organization is characterized by the two level of administration and is called chiefdom. Therefore, a number of local communities are united under one leader, the chief. The chiefdom thus can be defined in structural terms as a political organization with two administrative tiers. The lower tier is formed by the central or the supra-local leaders who rules via the local leaders. Many cases are known of the two-tier political organization called chiefdom. This king of example found in Southeast Asian, the Hmong, which consists of a central village where the chief resides a number of connected villages subordinated to the center. It does not seem far-fetched to assume that the chief are ruling chiefdom. However, the ethnographical reality teaches differently among the northwest coast Indians of USA. There are found a number of local community of which Philip Drucker states that the basic and the only political unit in native northwest coast culture was the local group between the chief in a village, but also between the villages. Strong feeling of competition existed. Clearly, this multi-chief local groups cannot be classified as chiefdoms. The connection chief and chiefdom thus does not always hold. In most chiefdoms are found great works ordered, organized and financed by the chief. The widespread view that the chiefdoms are permanently involved in war seems doubtful. There certainly is found a permanent state of war, but this does not necessarily imply that there is a permanent fighting. Finally, it is argued here that the concept of chief and chiefdom should be disconnected. There are found many chiefs administrating a single tier society, and there are also found big men ruling two-tier organization. In a very general sense, the law may be regarded as the explicit and the implicit rules for the conduct of members of society that are generally recognized or accepted, for which positive or negative sanction exist. Some such rules may always be compelled from the verbal statements of members of a given society. However, the law and its functioning rarely can be understood without the observation of behavior when trouble appears. In most societies, violation of these rules may be viewed as a criminal or individuals or as breaches of contract. Violations are classified in different ways in different societies. What may be regarded as a crime in one society may be viewed as a personal matter in another. Even murder may be regarded not as a crime against society, but as an injury to a family or kin group. Among the rules of law must be considered not only sanctioned actions, but rules which determine how and whom sanctions may be applied. In primitive society, law is a part of natural and supernatural principles. It is based on kingship types. It is originated from the moral and the ethical notion and the public opinion. In primitive law, does not distinguish between crimes and torts, public and private issues. It gives importance to sin and supernatural punishment. In here, kinship group looks after law. Therefore, there is a collective responsibility, the law. When we look at the society as an agency of political control, its particular mode of action as the political controller is characterized by enforceable force, that is by coercion. The law of society are a body of principle which underlay its activity as a state. This is defined as that association which has the monopoly of using coercion over its member within a territory. If other association also use some forms of force, the same is done because the state permits it and not in spite of or against it. The law consists of a set of principles which permit the use of force to maintain the political and social organization within a territory. Now, dear learners, we are going to learn about an introduction to social anthropology. When organized force steps in as a sanction and a drive behind a custom, it becomes a law and institution. Territory is not as interested by itself in primitive society, perhaps because the pressure on land is nearly absent. Kinship bonds are the main integrating force, and all external, like socio and political organization, is conceived in terms of these and enforced through an appeal to these. Let us now try to understand the relation between law and ethical norms. A breach of norm would often amount to a sin, or sins are feared to bring down the wholesale the wholesale supernatural punishment upon the heads of one and all. Thus, we find a strong collective opinion over vigilant and ruthless against such breaches as incest, adultery, witchcraft, and so on, which affect society as a whole. When we discuss the law of primitive society, we also try to know the judicial practices in their society. The association of which the law is institutional activity is government. It is the society or its representative in the role of socially sanctioned administration of social custom and laws. The government exists to perform three vital functions in some form or the other. These are the legislative, judicial, and the executive functions. These functions acquire the characteristic meaning when they are understood as relevant to and within a territory. Morgan and Maine and others have maintained that primitive society is atomistic and individualistic, and that the only bond that knit the people or that ties the people into grouping are those of kinship. Let us see an example of justice among the Australian hordes. Normally, an act of the retaliation carried out by one group against another that is held responsible for any injury suffered, and the procedure is regulated by a recognized body of customs which is equivalent to an international law of modern nation. The institution of organized and regulated governance is another example of retaliatory sanction. The killing of a man, whether international or accidental, constitute an injury to his clan, local community or kindred, for which satisfaction is required. The injured group is regarded as justified in seeking revenges, and there is frequently an obligation on the member of the group to the average the death. When the institution is completely organized, customs require the group responsible for the first death to accept the killing of one of their members as an act of justice and to make no further retaliation. An important step is taken towards the formation of a legal system where there are recognized arbitrator and judge who hear evidence, decide upon the responsibility, and assesses the damages. Only the existence of some authority with power to enforce the judgment delivered by the judges is then lacking. It has been argued plausibly that in some societies a legal system for dealing with private delicts has grown up in this manner that disputes are brought before arbitrators who declare the custom and apply it to the cases before them. Such courts of arbitration become established as regular tribunals, and finally there is a developed in the society some procedure for enforcing judgment. Here we see briefly about law and justice in primitive society. As we see already that primitive law is based on the kinship principle, an implication of this principle is another characteristic feature of primitive law. It means collective responsibility, where the state is in on behalf of the wronged. No group is important or competent enough by comparison to participate in the process of arriving at a decision. But where there is no state, each kin group has to defend itself and demand that amends to be made for wrong done. Without such collective responsibility, it would be impossible to redress wrong and to defend people adequately. It is derived from the kinship principle and is rooted deep in the need for the social survival. Justice is administered through kin group. Village council consisting of representatives from different kin groups sit in the judgment over breaches of the tribal norms, or where there are chiefs, the cases are decided by them, but rarely without consulting family heads or the village headmen. Now we are going to learn about the types of punishment. In primitive society, there were so many types of punishment in different primitive societies. Different types of punishment are there. All over the world, primitive societies scattered from nowhere in a primitive society except in Uganda. Do we have any evidence of imprisonment as a form of punishment? In Uganda, the king or the chief or the family head could order a man to be put in the stock, but an indulgent sentry would let him go off for the nights. A more severe form of punishment would be to have the culprit's arm and one leg fastened to the holes in heavy leather. These generally leads to the death of the culprit after some time. The murder is a widely accepted principle, but death by hanging as a punishment is unknown. As interesting implication of the principle of collective responsibility is involved here, it is not necessary that murdered himself should be killed. Any member of his family or wider kin group can be substituted for him. It is not the individual who is regarded to have been wronged, but the kin group as a whole, and kin group avenges itself on a kin group and not necessarily on an individual. In deciding the punishment, there is often a gradation of crime. Even the same crime may be differently punished according to who has been wronged. It means, for example, in certain parts of tribal Africa, down supernatural punishment on a person who refuses to obey a judgment. The killing of a member of one clan by a member of another, whether intentionally or accidental, is treated by the court of elders as a private delicti and is settled by the payment of an indemnity to the relatives of the victim by the killer and by his relatives. The elders also possess limited powers of dealing with public delicts by a procedure known as kinglon or enving. If a person is held guilty of witchcraft or is regarded as an habitual offender and thus as a public danger, the elders may inflict the punishment of death or may destroy the offender's homestead and expel him from the district. Before such action may be taken, elders from the remote regions must be called for the consultation, and the consent of the near relatives of the offender must be obtained. So let us summarize whatever we have learned till now. In this unit, we have acquainted you with some law and justice practices in the primitive society. The non-people belief on public opinion because of law, a sin, punishment which is supranational visitation, so on. Consequently, it had been said that the primitive obeys law spontaneously, willingly and slavishly. It was Malinowski who showed that there was no automatic submission to law. The simple system, as we have seen are the sense democratic small communities governed by very largely through chiefs and council selected by the group for their age, wisdom and demonstrated capacity as a leaders, whereas adultery with a commoner is a minor and a private wrong. With the wife of king or chief, it is a capital crime. There is also no such things by way of punishment to be found in a primitive society as the fine which is appreciated by the state in modern society. Instead, fines are charged in primitive society which are paid as a compensation to the aggravate partly. Punitive feasts have often to be given in which the whole village may partake. In paying this compensation for the wrong done, there is again a gradation which determines how much is to be paid for a particular offense and by whom and to whom. Let us see the punishment in Andamanis is largely a matter of public opinion. A lazy individual or one who is lacking in his respect to the elders may be punished by ridicule and contempt. Quarrelsome persons are avoided, and if they inflict serious bodily harm, may be subjected to a personal vengeance from the friends and the relatives of their victim, and especially violent and quarrelsome individuals or some who has committed a murder may eventually be forced out of the group or killed by those he has injured. A.R. Redlich Brown gives some examples about the punishment in his book Structures and Functions in Primitive Society. A development similar to this illustrated by the practices of the A. Kamba, A. Kaukulya and A. Theraka, Bantu people of the south and the southeast of Mount Kenya in East Africa who live in a scattered household communities. The usual procedure rests on the rituals, powers of the elders. They can pronounce a curse which is feared as inevitably bringing. Now, dear learners, we are going to learn about unit number 4, religion. In particular unit, we are going to learn about religion, primitive religion, animism, bongaism, totemism, types and functions of magic, religious functionalists like shaman, priest, medicine man, sorcerer, witch symbolism, in religion and rituals. Religion. Religion is inevitably a part of every culture. To be sure, the form of religious behavior vary enormously from one society to the next. There are almost countless differences in belief, rituals and another aspect of religious practices. But we must not be decisive by these differences and dismiss all religious but our own as mere conglomerates of magical practices and superstition. With our knowledge of medicine, it perhaps seems strange that the Navjos hope to cure tuberculosis by an elaborate 9-day ceremony, or that the treatment of disease among the non-literate people so frequently calls for praying, dancing and singing rather than for careful treatments in a hospital or a clinic. The fact is of course that few non-literates share our considerable medical knowledge. To them, illness and disease, with few exceptions, can be treated only as unexpected events, not controllably by ordinary means. And it should not be forgotten that even in our own society, there are many who quite sincerely believe that disease is best cured by prayer and faith rather than by medical knowledge. Religious pattern of behaving center then about the uncertainty of living and are particularly evident at time of crisis. Sometimes these are so-called life crises such as birth, adolescence, marriage, illness and death. Some or all of these occasions are in nearly all society the stimuli for the ritual and ceremony. Other crises affect the society as a whole. A food shortage, for example, in an Eskimo village, at such a time, the families in the village will come together and under the direction of religious leader called a shaman, attempt to discover by magical means the causes of shortage. Similar group ceremonies frequently mark a change of season, especially when in an agricultural community such a change result in a radical change of activity. Examples are found in harvest rituals, ceremonies to prepare field for planting, and religious activity such as the Hopi snake dance intended to bring rain to growing crop. Now we are going to learn about the primitive religion. We start with the introduction. Primitive religion is the beliefs and the practices of people who lack writing and have simple material culture. Apparently, it has existed since the beginning of mankind. It is the religion of a man without divine guidance, trying to make his peace with terrifying and mysterious power of nature. It can be said that primitive man lays bare the basic character of man because he is stripped of the material benefit that often mask our need for God. Probably most of the human race through the ages has adhered to primitive religion. It is still widely practiced today in its pure form among the pre-literate peoples. In addition, many members of major religion, including Christianity, take part of primitive thought and practice to varying degrees. In the West, there is now a great interest in primitive religion. Many think that modern secular men needs to recover primitive man's participation in the cycle of nature as well as his sense of the sacred. Because primitive religion has developed over every continent among the people who have no contact with each other, it is amazing that many basic similarities exist among primitive religion. Now we will understand the concept God. Primitive people believe in a large number of gods, each reigning over a family, clan, village, or a certain locality such as river or a mountain. That belief has been called Hinduism, meaning close adherence to a certain god while recognizing the existence of others. Most primitive do believe in one supreme high God who is the first source of all existence, but that God is usually considered too distant to be concerned with all the affairs of the men. Primitive men are thus left to deal with local gods, are generally lacking in mercy and love. Their ways are not always predictable, and primitive men are usually concerned either to appease their anger and to gain material favors from them. The gods are generally connected in some way with the dead ancestors, that is, they related to the tribe or clan and support the customs that have in the past kept the group functioning. Men and universe. Because of their lack of technology and scientific understanding, primitives trust that the universe is in control of the gods. Droughts, illness, and death pose great threats to primitive man, and his religion provides him to a certain degree with a feeling of security and a sense of control. It is thought that ancestors and the gods associated with them control human destiny, handing out rewards and punishment for actions that help or hinder the group. Usually, those gods and the ancestors are themselves a mysterious and fearsome as natural world. Like Hinduism and Buddhism, and unlike Christianity, Islam, the primitive world view is cyclical. There is no purpose to history. Various ages repeats themselves with no final goal. That view arises from the observation of the natural cycle of nature. Often primitive believe that only through their own ritual actions will be the world order be maintained. Many primitive reports that they follow customs and rituals without knowing why. Tradition simply tells them that it has worked in the past. Now, salvation and the afterlife. Often primitive religion teaches that Masiha will someday come and bring in a regime of peace and prosperity for the tribe. Hopes for salvation generally relate to the group up and to this world. There is little doctrine concerning the next life. A primitive man expects to merge with his ancestor in another world when he dies, but that other world is not vividly described, and if often is seen as just as full of troubles and confusions as this world. Salvation is thus piecemeal relating to a specific worldly distress. It is not felt that a state of grace can be reached in any final way. There will always be a new problem. Sacrifice, most often blood sacrifice of animal, is the usual means of atonement. Temporarily escapes into a realm of sacred time are possible. Though reenactment of mythological events, primitive men mystically participated in the action of gods and ancestral heroes. In that way, they inject a sense of meaning into a chaotic world. The unavisible position of man without God is seen clearly in a primitive man who can only flee for a short period of time from a terrifying and purposeless existence. Now, animism. Animism is the belief that everything has a soul or a spirit, an anima, in Latin including animals, plants, rocks, mountains, rivers and stars. Animists believe each anima is a powerful spirit that can help or hurt them, to be worshipped or feared or in some way attended to. Animus is a primitive religion whose adherents have for thousands of years, deifying animals, stars and idols of any kind, and practiced spiritism, witchcraft and divination and astrology. They use magic, spells, enchantments, superstitions, amulets talismans, charms, or anything that they believe will help to protect them from the evil spirit and placard the good spirit that are found everywhere in everything. This is the basic understanding of animism. The earliest anthropological theory about primitive religion seeking to trace its origin and explain it was given by Taylor. Taylor's conjectural argument ran as follows. Primitive man had certain experiences in his dreams. He engaged various types of activities even while he was sleeping. He met his dead ancestors in dream and had hallucination experience about them and other beings. While he was awake, he heard the echoes of his own voice. He saw his own reflection in ponds, pools, and rivers, and he failed to disentangle him from his shadow. Even while he was having this understanding able to his experiences, something of much deeper import must also have happened periodically and set the primitive man's mind thinking that the people must have died. Animism is most general of beliefs having reference to supernatural beings is defined by Taylor, one of the first to use the term as follows. It is habitually found that the theory of animism divides into two great dogmas, forming parts of the consistent doctrine. First, concerning souls of individual creatures capable of continued existence after the death or the destruction of the body. Second, concerning the other spirit upward to the rank of powerful deities. Spiritual beings are held to affect the control the event of the material world and man's life here and hereafter, it being considered that they hold intercourse with men and receive pleasure or displeasure from human actions. The belief in their existence lead naturally, and it might almost be said inevitably, sooner or later, to active reverence and propitiation. This animism in its full development includes the belief in soul and in a future state in controlling deities and subordinate spirits. This doctrine practically results in some kind of active worship. Animism illustrated that a belief or a set of beliefs in a supernatural beings, whether they originated in the soul of one's living creatures or have existed from the beginning of time as a supernaturals who may dwell in a natural phenomena such as weapon, houses or boats or invisibly in some portion or all of the universe. Now Bongaism. Majumdar takes the animistic belief to the tribal as their belief in malevolent spirit and the powers which influence the destiny of men. Discarding the idea of the only form of the religion among the primitive people, he suggests another form of thought. He opines that the tribal religion in India stands on the theory of Bongaism, but did not propound this with a view to make any hypothesis about the root of the primitive religion. But he left that the religious belief among the Ho, Munda and other tribes of Chota Nagpur give ample indications of their strong belief in one particular cluster of Bongas. The Bonga may be rightly be called the Indian parallel of the Malaysian term Mana. Bonga is conceived by the Ho as a power that pervades all spaces. It is indefinite and impersonal to start with. That is why it is believed to take any shape or the form. This power gives life to all the animals and plants. It encourages growth in plants and brings down the rain, storm, hail, food and cold. It kills and destroys evils, stop epidemic, curse diseases, cures diseases and gives currents to the rivers, venom to snakes and strength to tigers, bears and wolves. The vague idea of power later on evidences itself and is identified with the things or the object of his environment, as the latter is regarded by the primitive man as a part of himself. He believes that Bonga of Mana or an impersonal spirit form the substance of primitive religion everywhere. Majumdar's study of hosts further reveals that when the curiosity of a child is aroused by any mechanical controversy, however, a simple or a crude like a cycle, rail engine or a plane, etc., it is immediately satisfied by calling it Bonga. He understood Bonga in the same way as his father or any adult of his tribe does. It gives him a vague idea about a power, the nature of which he does not know, nor the adult of his tribe would worry about. The very mention of the word Bonga is enough. It means his reactions can be easily anticipated. According to the Vidyarthi, among the males, every child, adult and old, every commons and specialist has some sort of conception in his mind about the spirit and the supernatural world, which he calls the common term Grossian. The male children are instructed about the Gosaian from the very beginning. The term Gosaian is a household word and is used to denote a group of spirits that are believed to guide their destiny. Now we are going to learn about the concept totemism. Apart from the nature as a whole, the tribal people have also cognate themselves with the animals and plants in the form of totems. The totemism is a common feature of Indian tribal population, and most of them believe their mysterious relation with some plants besides animal. This in the kill of the host in their clan, or each clan bears a totemic object which is sacred to them. The Munda and the Oraon have also totemistic clan. The Santhal and the Kharia have clans named after plants or animals or material objects. All this tribe consider that the totemic plants or animals have helped or protected their respective ancestor of the clan concerned and have proved to be of some peculiar use or services. The people show reverence for, do not destroy their totem object. They also refrain from eating their fruits or the flowers. A totemic object found in a condition of disease is nursed back to health and let free. The dead totemic plant or animals are given full honor and are attended to in their last hour accordingly. At the same time, totemic kingship makes exogamy obligatory. Among the tribes who have some kind of religious regard for the totemic plant or animal, mention may be made of the Bhil or Gondas from Madhya Pradesh and Minas and the Billalas from Rajasthan and the Katkaris from Maharashtra Some of the tribes of Kerala consider totemism is the basis for many beliefs and practices. The Tribal Culture in India by Lalita Prasad Vidyarthi, Binay Kumar Rai. So all these are the chief contributor for this totemism. The types and the functions of magic. Religion and magic are two ways of tiding over crisis. Primitive man must have had faced the realities of life. He did so with his belief in some superior power and powers, either by trying to come into services, it means by magic, or by praying and offering worship to it. It means by religious approach. Both magic and religion are tools of adaptation, the objective being to help man out of difficult situations and relieve his tensions. In the word of Fraser, magic involves two basic assumptions. First, that like procedures, like or that an effect resembles its cause, and the second, that the thing which have once been in contact with each other continues to act on each other at a distance, even after the physical contact have been several. The first assumption, according to Fraser, underline what may be called homeopathic or imitative magic, the second, contagious magic. On the basis of evidence collected from all parts of the world, Fraser found that the magical formulas are based on two principles. Number one, like procedures, like, and second, once in a contact, always in a contact. He has reduced this principle into laws. The first he calls the law of similarity and the magic associated with it, homeopathic, imitative or mimetic magic. The second is called by him the law of contact or contagion, and the magic associated with it, contagious magic. On these two principles are based all the various magical rites found in primitive society. All the types of magic are labeled sympathetic by Fraser because he considered them to be based on the principle of sympathy between cause and effect. Now we see some examples. In Chota Nagpur, some tribal groups believe that thunder, with its rumbling noise, is the direct cause of rain. Therefore, when they want rain, they go to a hilltop, sacrifice a hen or a pig, and then start flinging down stones, rocks, boulder down the hill, expecting the rain to follow the rumbling noises created by their action. Just as it followed thunder, the who light fires expecting the rain to come out of the cloud of smoke that is raised to these skies. These are the cases of homeopathic magic. So also was the human sacrifice of the khond. It is believed that as tears roll down the sufferer's eyes and the blood gushes forth from his wounds, so will rain come. A well-known and very widespread instances of limitative magic is found in the belief that an enemy may be injured or killed by injuring or destroying an image of him. The magician prepares the image very carefully, making it of mud, clay, wood or some other like material. Various incantations or charms may be recited to identify the image with the intended victim. Then the image is damaged or destroyed. It is believed, of course, that the victim will suffer in just those places of his body that the image is injured. Thus, a knife or a point inserted into the arms or legs of the image will cause wounds in the arms or legs of the victim. Similarly, if the image is destroyed, the victim will die. Magic, to sum up, is a body of techniques and method for controlling the universe based on the assumption that of a certain procedures are followed minutely. Certain results are inevitable. It presupposes an orderly universe of cause and effect, not one in which event may occur unpredictably at the whim and fancies of supernatural beings. Nonetheless, magic is frequently associated with a religion as a technique with which to attain certain desired religious ends. It is indeed a method of compelling by its own logic and aid of the supernaturals to the Navajo. The contact of the patient with the sand picture of the supernaturals results inevitably in a flow of curative power from these gods and spirits to the patient. Now the functions of magic. It is easy, of course, to come to the belief that magic attains desired result. An enemy whose image is destroyed occasionally dies. The pouring of water from a pottery bowl is sometimes followed by rain. the Navajo patients frequently gets well, and if magic fails, there are many reasons. The complex procedure prescribed was incorrectly performed. Other and more powerful magicians work towards a contrary end. The universe is large and incompletely known, and so certain inimical forces may have prevented success. Successes are remembered where failures are forgotten. In the absence of written record, successes are easily overestimated. Finally, to men who know and understand little of the universe, the belief in magic is confronting. Despite failures, magic affords the hope that if the proper manipulations are made and the appropriate formulas are recited, the universe may become more predictable and knowledgeable and eventually both understand and controlled. So magic in a many ways fulfill both psychological functions of religion and the practical function of science. Dear learners, we are going to learn about the religious practitioner, the shaman. The term shaman in its widest sense refers to a man or a woman who serves a society as a part-time religious practitioner. Sometimes, as among the Eskimos, the shaman appears to be emotionally somewhat unstable, easily subjected to epileptic-like fits or frenzies, and to self-hypnosis. This is not universally the case. However, for many societies, the shaman is not required by his profession to do more than to perform routine or somewhat monotonous rituals. To become a shaman, an individual must be visited by the spirits while walking alone. When such a visitation occurs, the individual seeks advice from an elder and well-established shaman, and under his guidance has a number of religious experiences during which he talks to one of the outstanding divinities, the oldest and the most powerful of the spirit. This being given the Novik, his personal guardian spirit or the familiar, and the instruct him in the shamanistic procedure. The shamans are believed to possess the unusual powers. Among other things, they are said to call forth or suppresses the storms and banish or summon the game animals. Their most important function is, however, to cure disease, which is thought to result from the loss of the soul. The soul loss is serious, for if the patient does not recover his soul, he will eventually die. Curing rites take place only when requested of a shaman by a patient. The shaman then initiates the rites by speaking to his familiar spirit in a special tongue reserved for this occasion and very different in vocabulary, the style from than ordinary languages. The shaman gradually works himself into a frenzy by singing spirit songs, beating on a drum, and dancing in a wild and uncontrolled manner. As he approaches the state of frenzy, he trembles and groans, and he may sometimes foam at the mouth or become rigid and apparently insensible to pain. He repeatedly calls upon his familiar spirit and urges him to recover the soul of the patient. Should the patient recover, the ceremony has been successful, though no punishment is specifically meted out to shamans who fail to cure. A consistently unsuccessful shamans will, like a similar unsuccessful physician in our society, fail to receive calls from patients and so suffer both economic loss and lowered prestige. The shamans, if they so desire, can turn their powers to evil purposes by stealing and hiding the soul of their victim, so causing them the sickles and die unless the soul is restored by another shaman. Accordingly, specially powerful shamans are regarded with both respect and fear and treated with great circumspection lest they retaliated by magical means. The shaman goes into action only when called upon by a patient who approaches him with certain specific ceremonial gift. He need not accept every case that is offered but chooses those he wants. The shaman, once he has accepted a patient, also controls the time and the place of ceremony and may even limit the number of participation and the visitor who will permit to attend. The next, we are going to learn about the religious practitioner, the priest. The priest in contact to the shaman usually is a full-time religious practitioner who gains his power very largely through his association with an organized religious group and not alone through his ability to establish contact with supernatural beings. Priests are usually prepared for their profession by more or less intensive training and their performance through an occasion not unlike that of shaman is ordinarily the result of such training rather than the result of inspiration of possession by a god or a spirit. Though a priest may course conduct rites and ceremonies of a relatively private nature, they are most often in a charge of an established calendar of rituals laid down by the cult to which they belong and performed at more or less regular intervals by all or by some of the cult members. The existence of priests in a society usually presupposes them a relatively high degree of religious organization. The establishment of a temple, or there are scores in Dahomey. A good example is found among the Dahomeyans who live in West Africa, each devoted to a particular god. One of the pantheons requires a long and elaborate series of rites and sacrifices. In the course of these, an image of the god is installed on a platform inside a circular of mud and that each temple has a full-time chief priest and priestess, a number of part-time assistant priests drawn from the older cult members who know the rituals of a group of lay initiates called wives of the gods, and a body of novices who are undergoing initiation and who live in a special dwellings on the temple grounds. The priest and the temples are supported by gift from the adherents whose family must give a large sum of money at their initiation and may receive as well some support from the government. Ceremonies are usually of three kinds: sacred rites performed within the temple by the chief priest alone, rituals performed in the temple for initiated member, and large public spectacles. Though in other portions of West Africa, cults similar to these called secret societies are often powerful agency in government. In Dahomey, kings have shown their cults of their political power and keep them under strict surveillance. Medical men, according to the Lefleshy, among the Indians of North America, in contradiction to good shamans, there was another kind of medical man who held no office of public trust, for he lacked one of the essential qualifications for such as responsibility, and that was truthfulness. He continually wandered in thought, word and deed from the straight path of truth. He was shrewd, crafty and devoid of surplus. The intelligent classes within the tribe held him for contempt, while the ignorant of the community feared him. In primitive society, the medicine man, even though sometimes a draft, is respected because The weapons of his warfare, for the most part, are not carnal but spiritual. According to Bartels, the position of the shaman among the savage tribes is specially honorable and dignified. Among some people, when a man becomes obsessed with the idea that the awful eyes of the medicine man has been fixed upon him, he often sicknesses, wasters away and refuses food and dies of hungers and dies of hungers. The medicine man is naturally keen in turning to advantage the unusual esteem and privileges which comes to him by virtue of his office. Since the medicine men are preserver of the legends and the tradition of the tribes and of the art of writing, they either actively and passively become teachers of tribal lore and wisdom to the younger generation in Mexico, in Oceania, and in Central California. The shaman gave long and careful instruction, physical, mental, and moral, to the boys and the young men of the respective peoples. In many tribal society, the religious practitioners like shamans and priests are considered as medicine men. Now, next we are going to learn about the sorcerer, which symbolism in religion and rituals. Already stated, all religion consists of a mental attitude regarding the supernaturals. The most widespread manifestation of this attitude is in the shape of belief and rituals. The former, often wrongly called myth, rituals consist in the observance according to a prescribed manner of a certain action designed to establish license between the performing individual and the supernatural power or the powers. Beliefs are a character for the rituals as also a rationalization of the same. This belief ensures that the rituals will be observed. It may be kept in the mind that the conception of the exact nature of the supernatural differs from society to society and people to people. For some, the supernatural may be constituted of ghost and spirit. For others, it may be an impersonal power which pervades everything in this world. For still others, it may be manifested through a pantheon of anthropomorphic gods and goddesses or a single high god and so on. This belief, it is argued, buttresses a society's value and provide in the person of the sorcerer or witch a symbol of all that is defined as anti-social and evil, and thus a rallying point for the forces of morality of God. The fear of being accused of mystically evil doing is accordingly to his view a sanction for a moral conduct. Few rites suggest that it is not only a witch plays a morally relevant role but also his victims. This is because his misfortune is sometimes retrospectively attributes to his own misconduct or to that of a close associative. Thus, the fear not only of being accused but also of being attacked by witchcraft may be an important factor in a social control.